Alright, let's continue our book reading about Johns Hopkins cardiothoracic surgery. In this chapter, chapters 11, about lung and heart-lung transplantation. Let's read the key concept. Epidemiology. To date, more than 30,000 lung and 2,600 heart-lung transplantation have been reported to the International Society of Heart and Lung Transplant Registry. Since 2005, bilateral lung transplant has been the most commonly performed procedure. Pathophysiology: Lung and heart-lung transplantation is performed for patients who have end-stage cardiopulmonary disease with no contraindication and have the potential to be rehabilitated completely. Most lung transplants are done for chronic obstructive pulmonary disease or COPD, cystic fibrosis, and idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, and pulmonary hypertension. Primary pulmonary hypertension and Eisenmenger syndrome are the most common indication for heart-lung transplantation. Clinical features: Candidates typically experience severe dyspnea, cyanosis, hemoptysis, or multiple hospitalization and have New York Heart Association Functional Class 3 or NYHA Class 3 and 4 status. Lung transplant candidates typically have a life expectancy of 24 to 36 months and are usually less than 75 years of age. Patients with COPD generally have a forced expiratory volume in 1 second or FEV1 less than 20% predicted, whereas patients with cystic fibrosis usually have an FEV1 of less than 30% predicted. An increasing oxygen requirement, nutritional decline, and increasing requirement for hospitalization. Patients with interstitial lung disease may have rapidly progressive decline with increasing oxygen requirement and reduced vital capacity. Candidates for a heart-lung transplant have both pulmonary and cardiac disease and are typically under 65 years age. Diagnostic: Candidates for a heart-lung transplant undergo an extensive workup to evaluate underlying cardiopulmonary function and exclude malignancy, active infection, and organ dysfunction and vascular disease. Diagnostic modalities include pulmonary function tests, endoscopy, especially bronchoscopy, echocardiography, cardiac catheterization, duplex ultrasonography, CT or MRI, serologic screens, and metabolic panels. Treatment: Lung transplantation, COPD, cystic fibrosis, idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, and pulmonary hypertension. Heart-lung transplantation, Eisenmenger syndrome, sarcoid with both cardiac and pulmonary involvement. Outcomes: Lung transplant survival rates are 82, 55, and 30% at 1, 5, and 10 years, respectively. Best survival rates are among patients with cystic fibrosis. Significant spirometric improvement is immediate and plateaus at 6 to 12 months. For heart-lung transplantation, survival rates are 71% at 1 year. Early morbidity and mortality stem from technical complication, infection, and graft failure. Late complications are usually manifestation of bronchiolitis, obliterans, and malignancy. Introduction: Lung and heart-lung transplantation has emerged over the past several decades as an acceptable therapy for end-stage lung disease. Despite significant progress, lung transplantation remains a complex therapy that requires a multidisciplinary approach for successful outcomes. Moreover, it is increasingly clear that early post-operative events are associated with long-term complications. There are currently approximately 1,870 patients awaiting lung and heart-lung transplant, respectively. In 2009, uh, 15 and 99 adult lung transplants were performed in the United States. In 2005, the new allocation policy was adopted in the United States. Patients are now assigned a lung allocation score or LAS based on clinical parameters. The score emphasizes transplant utility rather than wait wait list time. It allows rapid allocation of organs to critically ill patients and decreasing allocation to less sick patients. As a result, patients are no longer listed just to accrue time. This has led to a significant reduction in the size of the active wait list, and the number of heart-lung transplant procedures has also declined. Bilateral lung transplant has supplanted many of the indications. Nonetheless, a small group of patients remain excellent candidates for this unique procedure. History: in 1963, James Hardy performed the first human lung transplant. This right single lung transplant recipient died in the 18 days with functioning allograft. After the introduction of cyclosporin, Reds and colleagues at Stanford performed the first combined heart-lung transplant. In 1983, Joel Cooper successfully performed single lung transplant in 3 patients. By 1992, bilateral sequential lung transplantation supplanted and blocked double lung transplant, marking the modern era of lung transplantation. Let's see. Recipient selection. Simply stage lung transplant is indicated in patients with end-stage lung disease, with the purpose of increasing survival and improving quality of life. Recipient selection is critically important and may be complex, given the range of pathologies in candidates. Absolute contraindication. There are a number of absolute contraindications to lung transplantation as defined by the International Society of Heart and Lung Transplantation. Patients should not have had a malignancy in the last 2 years, except for certain skin cancer. In patients with history of cancer, a disease-free interval at least 5 years is recommended. Candidates should not have untreatable and organ dysfunction. This would include uncorrectable coronary artery disease, significant left ventricular dysfunction, and end-stage liver disease. Patients with renal failure or significant insufficiency should not be considered unless combined with a kidney transplant. Active viral infections are a contraindication and include hepatitis B, C, and HIV. Patients who are actively using tobacco or abusing other tobacco or alcohol shouldn't be considered for transplant and should be abstinent for at least 6 months. Finally, significant psychosocial problems preclude transplantation. Relative contraindication. With improving results, several centers have been emboldened to offer lung transplantation to wider spectrum of patients. As a result, there are several relative contraindications to lung transplantation, and each center must decide to the importance of each. Initially, an age, an age cutoff for lung transplant had been proposed. However, several centers have transplant patients over the age of 70 years with reasonable results. The national experience in this age group, however, is poor. Nonetheless, the ISHLT guidelines have set 65 years as the upper limit and advanced age as a relative contraindication. Severely limited functional status and obesity lead to poor outcomes, and patients should actively participate in rehabilitation programs if possible, maintaining a body mass index below 30. Long-term rate after transplantation make severe osteoporosis and relative contraindication. Disease-specific indication for transplant. The ISHLT has established disease-specific guidelines summarized in the table 11.1. Controversy exists in transplantation for bronchoalveolar cell carcinoma, since the disease recurs locally. Lung transplantation has been used to treat this patient. Limited series have demonstrated acceptable short-term survival. Primarily, the disease do not recur except in sarcoid. Donor selection. There has been a significant liberalization of donor criteria over the past decade. The original criteria for what is considered a standard donor have given away to more realistic set of criteria, like table 11.2. Ultimately, centers can accept or decline any organ for various reasons. But it is increasingly clear that donor characteristics have less to do with outcome than previously thought. Large database studies have found only donor tobacco use greater than 20 packs years and age to be important risk factor, unless there are special consideration in lung transplantation. First, matching donor and recipient size is important. Oversized lung can compromise hemodynamics early after transplant and have long-term propensity of atelectasis. Height is clearly more important than weight, and gender is relevant when considering female recipient with fibrotic lung disease. There are many ways to judge size matching ranging from simple height and weight range to estimating total lung capacity. A simple rule is to use donors who are no more than 4 inches in recipient height for most lung disease. However, cystic fibrosis and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease can usually accommodate much larger donor size, as much as 12 inches in difference. Moreover, oversized donors may be trimmed with multiple wedge resection or even anatomic resection ex vivo to allow transplantation in small recipients. There has been growing interest in using non-heart beating donors or DCD for lung transplant. Lung remain metabolic stable without circulating for up to an hour when ventilated. As a result, DCD donors may yield functional lung without brain death-related injury. The initial experience is acceptable, but the number of actual donors added to the pool may be limited. Similarly, there is growing experience with ex vivo perfusion of potential donors to rehabilitate unacceptable lungs. Let's see the table 11.1, the disease-specific guidelines for testing for lung transplantation. Chronic obstructive pulmonary disease or COPD. Both index of 7 to 10 or at least one of the following. History of hospitalization for exacerbation associated with acute hypercapnia. PCO2 exceeding 50 millimeter H. Pulmonary hypertension or core pulmonal or both despite oxygen therapy. FEV1 20% or either DLCO 20% or homogeneous distribution of emphysema. Next, idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. Histologic or radiographic evidence of UIP and any of the following. DLCO is 39 or predicted. 10% or greater decrement in FVC during 6 months of follow-up and a decrease in pulse oximetry 88% during 6 minutes walk test, honeycombing in HRCT, and cystic fibrosis FEV1 30% of predicted or rapidly declining lung function in if FEV1 30% females and patients and 18 years of age have a poor prognosis. Consider earlier listing and or any of the following: increasing oxygen requirement, hypercapnia, and pulmonary hypertension, and idiopathic pulmonary arterial hypertension. Persistent NIHA class 3 or 4 or maximal medical therapy. Low or declining 6 minutes walk test, failing therapy with intravenous epoprostenol or equivalent, cardiac index of below 2 liter per minute, and right atrial pressure above 15 millimeter Hg. Sarcoidosis, NIFA functional class 3 or 4, and any of the following: hypoxia pulmonary hypertension, and elevated right atrial pressure. In the table 11.2, the NOR criteria. Standard, age below 55, ABO compatible, clear chest X-ray, arterial oxygen pressure above 300 on inspired oxygen of 100%, and positive and expiratory pressure of 5 cm H2O, and below 12 pack per year, smoking history, and absence of chest trauma, absence of aspiration, and gram stain free of bacteria. And realistic is age below 65 years and above 20 packs per year, smoking history with clear chest CT and no functional impairment, and positive donor sputum culture and unilateral infiltrate. There has been growing interest in using non-heart beating donors. We clearly read that. Donor assessment. When the recovery team arrives at the donor hospital, review of the imaging and documentation should be performed as well as the mechanism of the ventilator. Bronchoscopy should be performed by the recovery team to assess intraluminal mass and secretion quality. Purulent secretion that cannot be cleared bronchoscopically represent a relative contraindication to donation. After median sternotomy and opening of the pleural space, the lung should be palpated for mass and the compliance assessed by simple observation. Frequently, a base donor will have much better mechanics when the chest is open. The pericardium is then open. The superior vena cava should be mobilized completely to prevent injury to the right pulmonary artery. We prefer separation of the aorta and main pulmonary artery as well. In donor with small atria, modest dissection of Sondergaard's groove can help the right-sided left atrial cuff. A final arterial blood gas is obtained upper this ideal condition. If a single lung transplantation is planned, then blood gases may be obtained from individual pulmonary veins to assess each lung. Sondergaard. The main pulmonary artery should be cannulated with an angle 2F aortic cannula. Some institutions strongly feel to direct the cannula toward the pulmonary valve to evenly distribute preservation solution, but we have not found this to be clinically important. Prior to cross-clamping, the team should decide where venting of the left atrium should occur. If the heart is to be recovered, then the left atrial appendage is preferable. To preserve left atrial appendage function, some centers will rather incise along Sondergaard's groove. The SVC is ligated. Prostaglandin is injected into the main pulmonary artery. The inferior vena cava and left atrium are then vented. The aorta is cross-clamped and the preservation solution is delivered. When the heart-lung block is recovered, both cardioplegia and pulmonary preservation solution are used. During infusion of the preservation solution, we continue gentle ventilation with inspired oxygen and monitor the effluent from the left atria venting side. We infuse a 4-liter antigrade in all donors. The donor heart is then removed. Special attention should be made to the left atrial cuffs. These may be taken as two discrete cuffs or one single. The right-sided cuff can be compromised, and dissecting Sondergaard's groove prior to recovery can help prevent this problem. Once the heart is out, we proceed with retrograde perfusion of the donor lungs via the pulmonary vein orifices of low potassium dextran has emerged as the most common and currently best preservation solution. Low potassium dextran. This is particularly true for high-risk lung transplant recipients. The maximal acceptable ischemic time for lungs is between 6 and 8 hours. The dissection then proceeds outside the pericardium and anterior or ventral to the esophagus. The left and right pleural are then incised along the esophagus as far cephal as possible. And on the right, the azygos vein is transect, and on the left, the aorta is transect. The airway is then isolated between the aorta and SVC, and tissue clear laterally. The final attachments are usually at the level of carina, and the airway is stable with a modest level of inflation. We have never found it necessary to take the esophagus with the block, but some centers work in this plan to prevent injury to the allograft. The lungs are then inspected for damage and packed in ice saline and preservation solution. In the case of single lung transplantation, the block should be divided prior to packaging. Procedure selection. Single versus bilateral lung transplant. Bilateral lung transplant is necessary in suppurative lung disease and in pulmonary hypertension. Single lung transplantation can be used in patients with interstitial or fibrotic lung disease or and in emphysema. However, there is some evidence that bilateral lung transplant may have advantage in COPD and IPF. Although the patient with IPF have similarly uh, outcomes with single or bilateral lungs, high-risk IPF patient may benefit from bilateral lung transplant. For COPD, there is modest survival and potential immunologic advantage. Certainly, bilateral lung transplant in emphysema eliminates complications of the native lung, including hyperinflation, pneumothorax, differential compliance, and long-term risk of malignancy. Heart lung transplant. Patients with end-stage heart and lung disease are candidates for combined heart-lung transplant. Although primary or secondary pulmonary hypertension is no longer an exclusive indication for heart-lung transplant, patients with ventricular failure or unreconstructible heart disease are reasonable candidates. Occasionally, cystic fibrosis and primary pulmonary hypertension and sarcoid patient will have biventricular failure. Patient for a clamshell approach. Figure 11 and 2. Operative techniques. Bilateral sequential lung transplantation. After the induction of anesthesia, the recipient is intubated with double lumen endotracheal tube whenever possible, even when cardiopulmonary bypass is planned. The double lumen tubes allow for flexibility in dissection and the perfusion management. Pulmonary artery catheters are routinely as well as radial and femoral arterial lines. The femoral arterial lines allows more consistent blood pressure measurement. It also allows access to place intra-aortic balloon pumps and extracorporeal circulation cannula. The arms are placed over the head in arm stirrups. Bilateral anterolateral thoracotomies are performed through the fourth or fifth interspace and across the sternum. Some centers have used sternal sparing technique or bilateral posterolateral thoracotomies. Median sternotomy may also be used. However, access to the pleural adhesion may be limited. Once the retrosternal mediastinal adhesion are clear, cephalad and caudate, the intercostal muscles are incised with cautery generously. Two retractors are placed and the exposure is excellent. Attention is turned to the right lung first to isolate the inferior and superior veins, and then the pulmonary artery. The left lung is similarly dissected. In the presence of dense adhesion or severe bleeding, intrapericardial dissection may allow safer isolation, and an extrapleural dissection may cause less bleeding. When the donor lungs have arrived, the less perfused lung, based on preoperative ventilation, is removed first using vascular staplers. The bronchus is finally stapled. The hilar structures are further dissected into the pericardium to allow for maximal length and minimal cardiac manipulation. You can see in figure 11 and 3 exposure after clamshell or bilateral transsternal thrombectomy. Bilateral transsternal. The donor lung is placed in the chest, wrapped in ice sponge. The airway is anastomoted with running prolon or PDS. This may be done with telescopic or end-to-end technique. The membranous, the membranous trachea may be approximate with continuous sutures and cartilaginous with an interrupted technique. We use simple running end-to-end technique with satisfactory result. Simple running ya, end-to-end technique. Continuous suture and with interrupted. The pulmonary artery is approximate next, followed by the pulmonary veins. The allograph is the air through the atrial anastomosis with partial opening of the pulmonary artery column. With good hemostasis, the lung is inflated with room air and a reperfusion performed in a controlled manner over 10 minutes. The left lung is implanted in a similar fashion. However, exposure to the left hilum may be more difficult due to the hard and small left atrium found in the woman and fibrotic lung disease patient. Small left atrium. The pericardium may be open and the left ventricular apex displays medially similar to off-pump technique. Alternatively, the surgeon may decide to go on CPB, cardiopulmonary bypass, centrally to safely implant the left lung and with stable hemodynamics. CPB may also be used if the first lung is over-circulated or not functioning adequately to support the patient. The left lung may also be implanted first if necessary to maintain cardiopulmonary stability. It is critically important to identify phrenic nerves on both sides and not to injure them. Less concerning is injury to the recurrent nerve on the left. But vagus nerve may also be injured as they run dorsal to the airways. With both lung and the perfuse and the current pulmonary status stable, the one is closed with several chest tubes and three sternal wires. The endotracheal tubes is exchanged for a single lumen tube. And finally, bronchoscopy is performed to make sure that there is no intraluminal obstruction, anastomotic problems, or lobar torsion. You can see in figure 11 and 4, a patient following lung transplant using cardiopulmonary bypass, and the patient is centrally cannulated. Use of cardiopulmonary bypass. CPB may be used selectively, pulmonary hypertension, and patient unable to tolerate single lung ventilation, or routinely. Typically, the aorta and the right atrium are cannulated, and the patient is placed on normothermic bypass. If concomitant cardiac surgery is necessary, this may be done prior to lung implant. The provision on CPB is even more controlled, where the goal is to keep the mean pulmonary artery pressure low during the 10-minute period. We use a period of modified ultrafiltration as well. In this technique, after separation from bypass, the patient blood is withdrawn from the aorta and reinfused into the venous cannula after running through a hemoconcentrator. The purpose is to remove extravascular fluid and the inflammatory cytokines. Alternatively, there is some evidence that CPB use is associated with increased risk of primary graft dysfunction. Oh, risk of primary graft dysfunction and blood product usage, but less lung manipulation and silage in suppurative lung disease. Our centers use CPB selectively but with a low threshold. We initiate CPB for one lung when the first allograft is over-circulated or functioning poorly and when the left atrium on the left side is small. Single lung transplant. Single lung transplant use similar anastomosis, bronchus, pulmonary artery, and left atrial, and may perform through posterolateral thoracotomy or anterolateral approach. Heart lung transplant. Heart lung transplant involves the following connection: trachea, aorta, SVC, and IVC. As a, as a result, Either median sternotomy or clamshell may be used. In patients with potential pleural adhesion or previous sternotomy, we prefer clamshell incision. The recipient explants may be difficult, but the patient is cannulated via the aorta, SVC and IVC. The cross clamp is applied, and the heart is removed as in heart transplant. The phrenic nerves are identified, and the windows created dorsal to both. The pulmonary artery and vein may be divided with staplers or simply transect with the cautery, but the airway should be stapled to limit contamination. The airway are then dissected back to the trachea and then transect well below the innominated vein. The remaining cardiac structure may be resected or left behind. Care should be taken in the area of recurrent nerve, and we usually leave posterior or dorsal wall of the pulmonary artery near the ligamentum to minimize the risk. Special attention should be paid to hemostasis at this point before proceeding with implantation. The allograft is then brought to the field, and the bird lungs are placed in anatomic position. The tracheal anastomosis constructed first with 4-0-proline or PDS, followed by the IVC and the aorta. The cross clamp is then removed and then the SVC reconstructed. The lungs are inflated with room air during reperfusion and separation from bypass. We use period modified ultrafiltration prior to reversing the heparin. Typically, the cardiac function is good, and the patient may be managed as a standard lung transplant patient. Post-operative care. Managing the post-operative lung transplant patient demands a unique focus on protecting the allograft while supporting the patient. Transplanted lungs do not have lymphatic drainage, are susceptible to excess extravascular fluid, and have a propensity for oxidative injury. Moreover, a significant percentage of lung will have varying degrees of graft dysfunction that need to be managed carefully. From a ventilatory perspective, the recipient is maintained the lowest fraction of inspired oxygen, or FiO2 possible. The purpose is to minimize the oxidative stress, but also to provide an early warning system for graft dysfunction. Keeping the FiO low will lead to saturation if there is a problem and direct an evaluation in timely manner. We use pressure control mode of ventilation, maintain positive and expiratory pressure or PEP of 8, and try to achieve tidal volume of 8 cm per kilos. Ventilator setting are adjusted to maintain PaO2 above 70 and pH above 7.3. After a period of stabilization, the patient may be extubated within the 24 hours. Some patients, particularly after a single lung transplant, may be extubated in the operating room. Alternatively, some allografts need to prolong positive pressure and can develop severe pulmonary edema after extubation. Anecdotally, this is a bigger problem in patients with primary pulmonary hypertension, and we are much slower to win this patient. We also liberally place tracheostomy tubes and use non-invasive ventilation when patients are at risk for prolonged ventilation or reintubation. Pain control is critical, and we place an epidural catheter in all patients postoperatively. This is done while intubated patient and when any coagulopathy is resolved. Patients are extubated after a toilet bronchoscopy and when meeting conventional criteria for extubation. Volume status is maintained with central venous pressure or CVP below 8 as tolerated. With liberal use of adrenergic agents and diuretics, we use dopamine, vasopressin, and epinephrine preferentially. Patients with poor respiratory effort, allograft dysfunction, and phrenic nerve dysfunction undergo early tracheostomy. Non- Non-invasive ventilation is also used liberally in early postoperative period if the mechanism of respiratory failure is easily reversible. Once extubated, vigilance is critical. The allograft is the nerve and mucociliary clearance is impaired. As a result, patients need to work hard on pulmonary toilet. We liberally use bronchoscopy to clear airways, since pharyngeal dysfunction is common post-operatively. All of our patients undergo formal video fluoroscopic swallows studies. Many patients will aspirate thin liquids for 1 to 2 weeks post-operatively. A patient with preoperative malnutrition, severe swallowing problems, or gastroparesis receive percutaneous gastrojejunectomy feeding tubes. Percutaneous gastrojejunectomy feeding tubes. Immune suppression. Standard immune suppression for clinical lung transplantation include calcineurin inhibitor (CI), urine synthesis inhibitor, and steroids. Cyclosporin and tacrolimus have similar efficacy, but tacrolimus is most commonly used CI calcineurin inhibitor in the United States. Azathioprine and mycophenolate seems to have similarly efficacy as well. MMF does have some advantage in patients with preformed anti-HLA antibodies and is the most commonly used agents in the United States. Induction agents such as thymoglobulin, basiliximab, azulatamab are also commonly used 60% of US transplant patients. There is some evidence that these agents reduce acute rejection episodes in the first years, but with no long-term benefit. Azalutamab has been used to limit immunosuppression in series from the University of Pittsburgh. A small series of patients have also benefited from inhaled cyclosporine. Postoperative complication infection. There are four broad categories of postoperative infection. The first is bacterial. Patient may develop pneumonias from donor-acquired organism or native pathogens, particularly in CF patients. Preoperative antibiotics should be directed towards such organism for a prolonged period, at least 2 weeks. Surveillance bronchoscopy postoperatively should also include cultures. The second is viral. The most common is cytomegalovirus, and patients receive a prophylactic ganciclovir for donor and recipient mismatch. There are CMV naive donor and recipient may receive falsity. Other respiratory virus should be cultured in all bowls. Bronchoalveolar lavage. Fungal infection are the third troublesome pathogens. CF patients in particular are high risk. However, in the setting of immune suppression, any patient can infect or colonize, which in health amphotericin in all patients during their hospitalization and oral antifungals as directed by cultures. Finally, patients are at risk for pneumocystis infection and receive lifelong Bactrim for prophylaxis. You can see in table 11 and 3 rejection table. An acute rejection is grade 0 to 4, non-minimal, mild, moderate, and severe. And airway inflammation is grade 0 to X. 0 is non, 1R is low grade, 2R is high grade, and X is ungradable. And chronic airway rejection or obliterative bronchiolitis, 0 is absent and 1 is present. And chronic vascular rejection, accelerated graft vascular sclerosis. Rejection. Acute rejection. Acute rejection is unfortunately common after lung transplantation. The incidence in the first year is typically 30 to 50% depending on the definition of and severity. Cellular rejection is far more common, and the diagnosis is made by transbronchial biopsy. Symptoms may be similar to infection and include fever, dyspnea, and decline in spirometry. Less common is antibody-mediated rejection that may manifest in similar ways or fulminant vasculitis and capillary leak syndrome. Table 11.3 that we just read before summarize the current ISHLT rejection criteria. For cellular rejection, A2 or greater, treatment is high-dose steroids. For humoral rejection, plasmapheresis, rituximab, and IVIG are all used at GHH. The patient with refractory rejection may have CAMPAT or thymoglobulin. Multiple episodes of acute rejection may be implicated in the level in development of chronic allograft function. Figure 11 and 5 is representative specimen of severe A3 acute cellular rejection. Next is chronic rejection. Chronic rejection and chronic allograft dysfunction are likely to final common pathway of multiple injuries agents. Acute rejection, viral infection, and antibody-mediated injury, and more recently, gastrophageal reflux have all been postulated to cause a narrowing of small airways leading to airflow obstruction and allograft failure. Failing allograft with a decline FEV1 above 20% are considered as having bronchiolitis obliterans syndrome or BOS. Histologic confirmation may be done with biopsy. At 5 years, nearly 50% of recipients have a BOS. Treatment is limited and includes azithromycin, fundoplication, or transplantation. It is currently impossible to predict which patient will improve or stabilize their allograft function with any of these therapies, and studies are ongoing. The Washington University group has postulated that early primary graft dysfunction leads to anti-HLA antibodies that in turn injure the allograft and ultimately lead to BOS. Airway complication. The early surgical experience in human lung transplant was plagued with airway complication. In particular, airway dehiscence was a dreaded and a common complication leading to death. With surgical and medical refinement, dehiscence in uncommon but stenosis has emerged as a persistent problems. Patient can present with anastomotic problems or distal airway disease. The etiology remains unclear and is likely a spectrum of problems that may be technical or microvascular in nature. Fortunately, a number of techniques exist to remedy airway problems. Simple balloon dilatation, stent cover and unconfer, brachy, cryo, and anti-neoplastic therapies are all used. Many patients will require multiple interventions, and it is important to maintain a close follow-up. Special consideration for heart-lung transplant. Heart-lung transplantation patients are managed like lung transplant patients. The cardiac function is consistently good, although some patients may experience bradyarrhythmia. Interestingly, the lungs may be rejected without synchronous cardiac rejection. Both organs are typically biopsied in the follow-up period. Heart-lung patients appear to have the same risk of BOS, bronchiolitis obliterans syndrome, and coronary vasculopathy as isolated lung transplant patient. You can see in Figure 11.6 bronchoscopic appearance of post-transplant airway stenosis, result of dilating and stenting. Okay. Outcomes or result. Short-term outcomes have improved significantly over the past 20 years. Currently, unadjusted 90-day survival is 90%, and 1, 5, and 10 years survival is 83, 44, 54, and 29%, respectively. The short-term patients with pulmonary hypertension have worse outcomes than other diseases. However, over time, pulmonary fibrosis emerged with worse outcomes and then at 10 years. Emphysema has the lowest long-term survival. Patients with higher LAS appears to have higher one-year mortality post-transplant. Moreover, patients with Patients on mechanical ventilation and extracorporeal membrane oxygenation have significantly worse postoperative outcomes. This should be kept in context with the high likelihood of death without transplant. Survival after heart lung transplant is similar. Spirometry is currently the basic measure of lung performance. The patient achieve a maximal function after 6 months to 1 year. Bilateral lung transplant patients have better spirometric lung function than a single lung. Bronchiolitis obliterans syndrome (BOS) is the long-term form of allograft dysfunction. The pathologic lesion is obliteration of bronchioles with airflow obstruction and decline in spirometry. The exact cause is unknown, but there are a number of putative mechanisms including CMV, chronic aspiration, and reflux, as well as antibody-mediated injury. It represents the final common pathway of airway injury leading to a maladaptive reparative response. Treatment is limited to augmenting immune suppression, surgical correction of reflux, and azithromycin. There is likely spectrum of on-boss that may or may not be responsive to therapy. Certainly, timing of therapy and onset of BOS will determine efficacy. Retransplant is also an option in properly selected patients. Special issues: sensitized patient. Perform antibodies against SLA loci creates challenge both pre and post-transplant. These antibodies form the basis of prospective cross-matching, but with modern laboratory technique, centers are moving away from the tissue cross-matching. Currently, flow cytometric methods allow for sensitive detection and specification of the antibodies. All donors are typed and comparison is made between antibodies and antigens. This is virtual cross-matching without the need for actual tissue cross-matching. Recipients have shorter wait times. Since 1997, the presence of anti-HLA antibodies is no longer risk factors for early death in lung transplantation. However, this appears to be a relationship with de novo development of antibodies and risk of chronic rejection. Sensitized patients are managed with multiple therapies, including IVIG, plasmapheresis, and rituximab. Reflux and aspiration. As cervical challenges have been overcome, attention has turned to long-term failure. Patients with significant gastroesophageal reflux appear to have worse outcomes. Moreover, post-transplant reflux worsens in subset of patients. This is likely consequence of fungal injury, immune suppression, and postoperative change. Led by work at Duke University, an aggressive approach to correcting reflux with fundoplication has proven to be safe, effective, and in many patients to stabilize and improve allograft function. Unfortunately, the results with post-transplant fundoplication have been inconsistent, and future studies are needed to be to better define timing of the procedure. Uh, Primary graft dysfunction. Early postoperative allograft failure is formally described as primary graft dysfunction. There is a range of failure that is defined by PaO or FiO2 ratio, table 11.4. Let's see the table 11.4. International Society for Heart and Lung Transplantation, primary graft dysfunction and grading schema. PaO or FiO2. Grade 0 if above 300 and radiographic infiltrates consistent with pulmonary edema absence. It consists of PaO2 or FiO2 and radiographic infiltrate consistent with pulmonary edema 300, 300 to 200 and below 200. 0, the grade 0, grade 1, grade 2, and grade 3. Absence, present, present, and present. Okay. The injury has all hallmarks of acute respiratory distress syndromes, hypoxemia, pulmonary hypertension, and poor compliance, but differs in that it is usually improves within 72 hours. Support includes protective ventilation strategies and extra corporeal membrane oxygenation. It is important to rule out mechanical problems, including pulmonary vein thrombosis or stenosis and immunologic injury. Severe PGD has a mortality of 30 to 40% and survival are at increased risk of long-term allograft dysfunction. There have been several studies looking at risk factors for PGD include clinical and biochemical variables. Clinically important variables include pulmonary hypertension, prolonged ischemic time, and blood product transfusion, retransplantation. When allograft dysfunction is reversible and other and organ dysfunction is absent, retransplantation may be the only option. It counts approximately 5% of all transplant patients and, has an just 1 year survival of 70%. In the United States, most transplants are bilateral lung transplant and are 60% are done for both. Uh, Small percent patient with early allograft failure may undergo a retransplant but with inferior result. Mean time to retransplant in the United States is 105 1,500 days. Lung allocation score. Since 2005, donor lung in the United States have been allocated by LAS. The score is generated from several clinical variables and prioritized patients. The score 0 to 100 was designed to maximize the utility and minimizing wait list mortality and maximizing post-transplant survival. After implementation, waiting time has decreased and mortality has remained unchanged or slightly lower. Postoperative survival is unchanged in the most patients. However, patients with LAS above 44 appear to have worse 1 year survival. The score is revised periodically. Let's see the component of LAS. Age, BMI, FVC predicted functional status, diagnosis, PA systolic pressure and mean, diabetes, mechanical ventilation, oxygen requirement, 6-minute walk distance, and serum creatinine, and change in CO2. Next, the last conclusion. Lung and heart lung transplantation is complex, but effective therapy for patients with end-stage lung disease. Future work in the field will continue focusing on improving early allograft performance and further understanding long-term allograft dysfunction.